You think you can just walk away? I'm talking about revenge for what you did to my daughter.
Please, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I beg.
Daniel Hurst had no idea what he was walking into. In the next 14 minutes, standing under the halogen lights of a school parking lot on a cold Thursday evening, he would be threatened with a $1.9 million lawsuit, face the possibility of losing everything he had built over 22 years, and watch his name get dragged through local headlines. The man who would later sue him was his daughter's volleyball coach, a man with a carefully constructed reputation, a wall of trophies, and a pattern of behavior that the school district had quietly ignored for years. What the coach didn't know was that Daniel Hurst had spent 3 months documenting everything. He had screenshots, witness statements, text messages his daughter had been too afraid to show anyone, and a family attorney on speed dial. He also had something the coach had never counted on, a father who refused to be quiet. This wasn't going to be a story where the institution protected itself and the family walked away with nothing. This was going to be a story about what happens when a predator picks the wrong family. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or state in the comments below. And if you believe parents have not just the right but the responsibility to protect their children even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs them, please hit that subscribe button right now. This story is going to hit close to home for a lot of people, and you are going to want to see how it ends. Daniel Hurst was 44 years old, a project manager for a commercial construction company in Tucson, Arizona. He had spent 22 years being methodical, detail-oriented, and patient qualities that made him good at his job and, it turned out, devastatingly effective at building a legal case. He was not a loud man. He was not a man who sought confrontation. He was the kind of father who coached Little League on weekends when his kids were small, who showed up to every parent-teacher conference with notes already written, who drove 2 hours each way to watch his daughter compete at regional tournaments and sat in the bleachers without complaining once about the hard plastic seats or the cold gymnasium air. He believed in doing things the right way. He believed in process and documentation and letting facts do the heavy lifting. Those beliefs had served him well in construction, where a single misread blueprint could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. They would serve him even better here. His daughter, Cassie, was 16 years old and had been playing volleyball since she was 9. She had started in a rec league, moved up to club ball by the time she was 11, and by 14, she was playing on a competitive travel team that required 2 practices a week and tournaments most weekends from October through March. She was talented, genuinely talented, the kind of player coaches noticed and college scouts were beginning to watch. She had a natural read of the game that you couldn't teach, an instinct for where the ball was going before it got there. She was also one of those athletes who made the players around her better, not by being loud or demanding, but by being consistently excellent and consistently composed. Her teammates trusted her. Her coaches praised her. Her parents drove every mile and paid every tournament fee and watched every match with the kind of quiet pride that doesn't need to announce itself. She was also, until the spring of her sophomore year, one of the happiest kids Daniel had ever known. She laughed constantly. She had a tight group of friends she had known since middle school. She talked about volleyball the way some kids talk about music or movies, with genuine passion, with opinions, with a sense that it was part of her identity and not just something she did on weekends. She talked about playing in college. She talked about specific schools she liked. She had a whiteboard in her bedroom where she tracked her stats from each tournament. She was the kind of kid who made parenting feel like a privilege. Then something changed. It started small, the way these things always do. Cassie became quieter. She stopped talking about volleyball the way she used to. She started asking to skip practices for reasons that didn't quite add up: a headache on a day she'd seemed fine at breakfast, homework that she said she couldn't get to otherwise, tiredness that seemed different from normal teenage tiredness. She stopped eating dinner with the family on nights she had been at the gym. She spent more time in her room. She stopped texting her friends as much. One of those friends called Karen to ask if Cassie was okay, which is the kind of thing a 16-year-old's friend does only when something is genuinely, visibly wrong. Daniel and Karen noticed all of it. They asked her what was wrong. Cassie said nothing. She said she was just tired. She said it was fine. She said sophomore year was harder than freshman year and she was adjusting. She gave them the answers teenagers give when they want the conversation to stop. And Daniel and Karen respected her space the way good parents do, while quietly watching and quietly worrying and quietly talking to each other late at night after she had gone to sleep. It wasn't fine. The coach's name was Brett Connolly. He was 38 years old and had been the head volleyball coach at Lakewood Preparatory Academy for 6 years. Before that, he had coached at 2 other schools in the state, Jefferson High School in Mesa and Canyon Ridge Academy in Scottsdale, both times departing under circumstances that were never fully explained in his personnel file. At Jefferson, the official reason was budget cuts. At Canyon Ridge, it was listed as a mutual decision. Neither school had documented anything formally, neither had conducted an exit investigation. They had simply let him go and moved on, and in doing so, they had handed him quietly to the next school and the next set of girls, like a problem passed between people who didn't want to be the one holding it. At Lakewood, he had built something impressive on paper. Back-to-back state championships. A varsity program that had gone from irrelevant to regionally dominant in 4 years. He was featured in a local magazine spread with the headline Building Champions. He was invited to speak at coaching clinics across the state. Parents called him demanding and intense, but worth it. The administration credited him with raising the school's athletic profile, attracting new enrollment from families specifically looking for strong sports programs, and adding a kind of prestige to the school's name that translated directly into funding and donations. He was beloved. That's the word people used. Beloved. He had a gift for making families feel like their daughter was special, like he had noticed something in her that other coaches had missed. He said the right things in parent meetings, technical things, specific things, things that showed he had actually watched their daughter play and thought carefully about her development. He remembered details. He followed up. He was attentive in a way that felt like investment, like he genuinely cared about the futures of the young women in his program. That gift was the problem. Have you ever had a gut feeling about someone that turned out to be right? Drop a yes or no in the comments. What Daniel discovered, and what he discovered slowly, painfully, over the course of 3 months, was that Brett Connolly had been sending Cassie private messages on a team communication app called Team Connect, which the program used to share practice schedules, game film, and coaching notes. Every player had an account. Every parent had technically agreed to terms of service when their daughter joined the program. The app was legitimate. The messages were not. They started professionally. Coaching feedback after practices, notes on technique, encouragement before tournaments. The kind of messages a coach might reasonably send to an athlete. Then they shifted. They became more personal, more frequent, sent at times that had nothing to do with upcoming practices or competitions late on school nights, weekend afternoons, early Sunday mornings. Comments about how Cassie looked in her new uniform. Questions about whether she was seeing anyone. References to conversations they had apparently had in person that Cassie had never mentioned to her parents. Suggestions that they meet one-on-one outside of practice to work on her approach and her jump serve. Just the two of them, at the gym, before the other players arrived. Or, on several occasions, at a coffee shop near the school where he said they could review film on his laptop without distractions. Subtle, gradual, deliberate, the textbook architecture of grooming. Every step just small enough to seem plausible in isolation. Every message just deniable enough that a teenager unsure of the lines wouldn't know for certain if they had been crossed. Cassie had not told her parents because Connolly had told her more than once that this was just how elite coaches communicated with their most serious athletes. That the players who made it to the next level were the ones who had a real relationship with their coach, that her parents wouldn't understand because they weren't in the world of competitive athletics the way he was, that this was between them, the way all good coaching relationships were. He had given her a framework for keeping his secret, and he had delivered it in the language of her ambition. When Daniel finally saw the messages, when Cassie finally showed him shaking on a Sunday afternoon in March, after weeks of carrying it alone, and one night of finally crying to her mother in a way that couldn't be explained away as stress or tiredness, he did not scream. He did not cry in front of her. He did not say anything that would make her feel responsible for his reaction. He sat next to her on the couch, put his arm around her, and told her she had done absolutely nothing wrong. He told her that what she had shown him took courage. He told her she was safe. He told her that he loved her, and that from this moment on, she would not have to carry this alone. Then he kissed the top of her head, stood up, and walked into his home office. He closed the door, he sat down at his desk, and then he spent the next 4 hours doing what project managers do. When they discover a serious problem, he began building a file. He screenshotted every single message, organized chronologically, with dates and times visible in each image. He noted every date and timestamp. He exported what he could from the app. He wrote down everything Cassie had told him about specific incidents that hadn't been captured in the messages, comments made in the gym after other players left, moments in the equipment room, the time Connolly had kept her back 20 minutes after practice, ended to review her form while the parking lot emptied out, the specific wording of things he had said that had made her feel confused and uncomfortable and then guilty for feeling that way. He was thorough. He was organized. He dated and labeled everything. He created a folder structure on his computer the way he would for a construction project: documentation, correspondence, timeline, evidence. Then he called Karen's cousin, Sandra Okafor, who was a family law attorney with 12 years of experience and a specific focus on cases involving institutional misconduct. Sandra had handled school negligence cases before. She knew how these situations developed, how schools responded, and where the legal leverage actually lived. Sandra listened for 90 minutes without interrupting. She asked 3 clarifying questions at the end. When Daniel finished, she said quietly and without any ambiguity, "This is serious. This is a pattern. Don't do anything yet. Don't contact the school. Don't contact Connolly. Don't post anything. Don't tell other parents. Let me make some calls first." Daniel waited. He is very clear about this when he tells the story now. The waiting was the hardest thing he has ever done. Because while he waited, building the case and following Sandra's instructions and trusting the process, Cassie had to go back to practice. She had to walk back into that gym. She had to act normal. She was 16 years old, and her father was asking her to do the bravest thing imaginable because the legal strategy required it, and she did it. She went back. She kept going. She did not break. Daniel has said in interviews that he will never fully process what that cost her. Sandra moved quickly. She contacted 2 colleagues in criminal law, shared the documentation, and confirmed that what they were looking at met the threshold for multiple criminal charges under Arizona statutes. Within 1 week, she had submitted a formal report to the Pima County Sheriff's Department with the complete documentation package. She filed a written formal complaint with Lakewood Preparatory Academy Administration addressed to the principal and the superintendent. She sent a letter to the Arizona Interscholastic Association requesting an immediate investigation into Connolly's conduct and his suitability for continued coaching certification. She also reached out, quietly and carefully, to the families of 2 former players that Cassie had mentioned, girls who had been on the team the year before and had left the program mid-season. Both families had stories. Both had message threads of their own. Both had stayed silent because they thought no one would believe their daughter over a championship coach. Neither of those families had to think long before agreeing to come forward. The school's response was immediate and, to Daniel, infuriating in the specific way that institutional self-protection always is. They placed Connolly on paid administrative leave pending an internal review. They sent a carefully worded letter to parents that said only that a staff matter was being addressed confidentially and that there would be no disruption to the program. They did not tell parents that a coach was under investigation for inappropriate conduct with a minor. They did not reach out to other players or their families to ask whether anyone else had experienced anything concerning. They did not contact law enforcement themselves. Even though multiple state statutes required them to report suspected child abuse, they called their insurance company, they called their legal counsel, they began building a defense strategy before they had even asked a single student if she was okay. The athletic director sent a separate note to coaching staff reminding everyone that personnel matters were confidential and that comments to parents or media were prohibited. The language was professional and practiced. This was not their first time managing a situation by managing information. Connolly, placed on leave, was officially barred from school grounds, but he still showed up. On a Thursday evening, 3 weeks into the investigation, Brett Connolly appeared in the parking lot outside the Lakewood Athletic Complex. Practice had just ended. It was a regular evening practice. The team was still active because Connolly's leave had been kept confidential and the new interim coach had said nothing to the players about what was happening. Girls were coming through the side doors in ones and twos, pulling on jackets, finding their parents' cars, the ordinary unwinding of a Thursday night. Connolly was standing near the back of the far parking row next to his truck in plain clothes, watching. One of the other parents, a mother named Trisha Wallace, recognized him immediately and texted Daniel before he had even pulled into the lot. She said, "He's here, parking lot, far end by the fence." Daniel had just turned off the main road. He read the text at a red light. He pulled in, parked in the first available space, and sat in his car for a moment. He thought about what Sandra had told him. He thought about what was documented. He thought about what Cassie had done every day for the past 3 weeks walking back into that gym. He thought about the 2 other girls whose families had come forward, and about how many others there might be who hadn't yet. Then he got out of the car. Do you think Daniel had the right to confront Connolly directly? Let us know in the comments. He walked across the parking lot. He wasn't running, he wasn't shouting, his hands were at his sides. Later, several parents who witnessed the confrontation would describe the same thing independently. A very calm man walking with very clear purpose towards someone who did not expect to be approached. Someone who looked, said one parent, like he had been saving up for exactly this moment for 3 months and had decided exactly what he was going to spend it on. Brett, Daniel said, stopping about 4 feet away. Close enough to be heard clearly, far enough that his body language was unmistakably non-threatening, far enough that nobody watching could call what was happening physical intimidation. Connolly turned. He had been looking toward the side door, watching players exit. When he turned and saw Daniel, his expression went through several phases in under 2 seconds: surprise, recognition, and then something harder. "You need to leave this parking lot," Daniel said. His voice was steady and even, not loud, not angry. The voice of a man who had made a decision and didn't need emotion to back it up. "You are on administrative leave. These are minors. You have no legal or professional reason to be standing here." Connolly's first response was dismissive. He said he had left some equipment in his truck earlier in the week and had come to retrieve it. He said Daniel had no authority to tell him where he could or couldn't stand. He said this was a shared facility and a semi-public lot and that he was allowed to be here. He stood his ground with the confidence of a man who had spent years talking his way out of situations, who had learned to project certainty even when the ground was moving underneath him. Daniel let him finish. "I have documentation," he said. He still didn't raise his voice. Around them, other parents had noticed. A few had stopped moving toward their cars. 2 were holding up phones. "I have 47 messages you sent my daughter. I have a formal report filed with the sheriff's department with a case number. I have a complaint submitted to the AIA with a reference number. And right now, in this parking lot, I have multiple parents watching you stand here among teenage girls while you are under active investigation for your conduct with a minor, so I am asking you one final time to leave." There was a pause. The parking lot was very quiet in the way that a space gets quiet when everyone in it is paying attention to one thing. Something moved across Brett Connolly's face then. Not remorse, not fear, exactly. Something colder and more deliberate, the expression of a person rapidly calculating how much the other person knows, whether the situation can still be managed, whether there is a version of this that ends in his favor. He seemed to arrive at a conclusion. "You have no idea what you are doing," Connolly said, his voice dropping so it wouldn't carry as far. "You're going to regret this. I have built something at this school. 6 years, 2 championships. These girls' futures. You come in here with your screenshots and your little lawyer and you think you can burn down what I've built? You think any of this is going to stick? I have people in this administration who have known me for 6 years. I have parents in this program whose daughters I've helped get scholarships. You are one angry dad with a grudge, and you are about to find out what happens when you go after the wrong person." He paused, and then he said it. The line that would later be played 3 times for a jury, "You're going to regret this." Daniel looked at him for a moment. His expression did not change. "I look forward to hearing from your attorney," Daniel said. "Make sure they know about the other 2 girls." Connolly stared at him. The calculation ran again behind his eyes, and this time, whatever it returned made him go very still. Then he got in his truck and drove out of the parking lot without another word. 3 parents had filmed portions of the exchange. The footage, taken from different angles, showed Daniel standing stationary, arms at his sides, voice controlled. It showed Connolly stepping forward at one point, pointing, his voice rising. It showed the parking lot full of minors and their families. It showed, with complete clarity, a man under investigation for conduct with a minor choosing to be present in a space full of minors and then threatening the parent who asked him to leave. When Connolly's attorneys later argued that Daniel had provoked and intimidated their client, there were 3 independent videos from 3 different phones that said otherwise. 5 days later, a process server knocked on the door of the Hurst family home at 7:40 the morning. Daniel was served before he had finished his coffee. Brett Connolly was suing him for defamation, tortious interference with a professional relationship, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit demanded $1.9 million in damages. It alleged that Daniel had made false and damaging statements to school administration, to the Arizona Interscholastic Association, and to other parents in the Lakewood parking lot. It alleged that those statements were made maliciously and without factual basis, and that as a direct result, Connolly had suffered damage to his professional reputation, lost income, and experienced severe emotional distress. The lawsuit requested a jury trial. Daniel read it once, set it on the kitchen table, and called Sandra. The local news picked it up within 48 hours. A coach with a championship record. A $1.9 million lawsuit against a parent. The initial framing, driven primarily by a statement from Connolly's legal team, suggested that a respected educator was being targeted by an aggrieved parent making unsubstantiated claims. Several outlets ran the story with Connolly's name and a photo of him holding a trophy from the state championship. It looked, on the surface, exactly as Connolly's attorneys had calculated it would look. A successful coach, a disruptive parent, an unresolved he-said situation. The strategy was transparent. Make the cost of speaking up feel high enough that Daniel would reconsider. Create enough noise and uncertainty that other families might hesitate. Drain time and money from the Hurst's legal effort by forcing them to defend a civil suit simultaneously. Turn a predator's legal team into a weapon aimed at the family of his victim. Type facts. If you think institutions that protect abusers should face consequences alongside the abusers. Daniel and Sandra held a press conference 2 days after the lawsuit became public. Sandra stood at the podium in a conference room at her law office with a stack of documents and a composure that made it clear she had been preparing for exactly this moment. She read a statement that was 900 words long. It included direct citations from the documented messages, with specific dates and content referenced without reproducing anything explicit. It included the timeline of the prior informal complaint the school had received 2 years earlier, a complaint obtained through a public records request, and asked specifically why it had not been formally documented or reported. It named the 2 additional families who had come forward with their authorization and stated that their experiences were documented and corroborated and available for investigative review. It included a formal public request that the Pima County Sheriff's Department confirm that their investigation was actively ongoing. And it closed with a single legal clarification: defamation requires the statement to be false. They were fully prepared to defend in court, on the record, in front of a jury, the truth of every statement Daniel Hurst had ever made about Brett Connolly. She then stepped aside and let Daniel speak. He didn't use notes. He didn't look down. He looked directly at the cameras and spoke for 4 minutes in a voice that was controlled and specific and entirely devoid of the kind of emotional performance that could be picked apart later. "My daughter is 16 years old," he said. "She spent months believing that she couldn't tell anyone what was being done to her because an adult who had authority over her, who had her trust and her family's trust, deliberately and carefully taught her to stay quiet. He told her that what was happening was normal. He told her that her parents wouldn't understand. He used her ambition and her respect for her sport to keep her silent, and it worked until it couldn't anymore. I am not going to be quiet about what happened to her. I am not going to be quiet because someone filed a lawsuit designed to make silence feel safer than speaking. I am not going to be quiet because the institution that employed this man is hoping this goes away before anyone asks what they knew. If telling the truth about what was done to my daughter cost me $1.9 million, we will fight every single dollar in a courtroom, and every juror will hear every message he sent her, and every juror will hear the name of every other girl who came forward. And we will let 12 ordinary people decide whether what happened to my daughter was normal coaching." He paused. It wasn't. The clip ran 47 seconds. It was viewed 2.4 million times in 72 hours. The day after the press conference, a fourth family contacted Sandra Okafor directly, then a fifth. Over the following 2 weeks, 3 former players from Connolly's time at Jefferson High School in Mesa reached out to the Pima County Sheriff's Department independently after seeing news coverage of the case. 2 former players from Canyon Ridge Academy did the same. One of those women was now 24 years old. She said she had thought about coming forward for years. She had never believed anyone would listen. She provided her own documentation, screenshots she had saved on an old phone for 6 years because something told her she might need them someday. The picture that had been assembling quietly in the background of 2 school districts and 1 athletic association for nearly a decade suddenly had an unmistakable shape. Connolly's attorney filed a motion requesting that Daniel be required to take down social media posts referencing the lawsuit. The motion was denied. They filed a second motion seeking a gag order on Sandra Okafor's public statements. That was also denied. Every legal maneuver designed to reduce noise produced more of it, because each filing generated another news cycle, and each news cycle brought another family forward. 6 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, Brett Connolly was arrested at his apartment on a Tuesday morning. The charges were 2 counts of sexual exploitation of a minor under Arizona statute 13 to 3,553, 1 count of unlawful age-related conduct using an electronic communication device, and 1 count of luring a minor for sexual exploitation. The arrest was based on the documented evidence from Cassie's case, the corroborating testimony of 2 additional victims, and digital forensic evidence recovered from Connolly's phone and laptop pursuant to a warrant. The Sheriff's Department issued a public statement confirming that the investigation had been initiated following a formal complaint submitted by the Hurst family's attorney. The $1.9 million lawsuit was formally withdrawn the day after the arrest. Connolly's civil legal team filed a notice of voluntary dismissal with the court. There was no explanation. There was no statement. There was no apology. What followed was a reckoning that extended in multiple directions simultaneously. Lakewood Preparatory Academy faced a civil lawsuit filed by 3 families, the Hursts and the 2 families who had originally come forward alongside Cassie, alleging institutional negligence, failure to act on a prior complaint, and failure to meet mandatory reporting obligations under Arizona law. The complaint cited the 2021 informal report, the absence of any formal documentation, the failure to notify law enforcement, and the school's response to the initial formal complaint, which had prioritized confidentiality over student safety. The athletic director, whose name appeared repeatedly in the investigation findings, resigned before the civil case was formally filed. The principal was placed on administrative leave pending the school board's review. 2 members of the school board announced they would not seek re-election at the end of their terms. The school's legal team spent the next 8 months trying to negotiate settlements with 3 families simultaneously, while the local press reported every development. The Arizona Interscholastic Association launched a statewide audit of coaching certification processes, specifically examining whether prior complaints or unexplained departures were being captured in credential reviews. The audit found gaps in 23 of the state's school districts. It found 4 other coaches currently working in Arizona schools who had left previous positions under circumstances that had never been formally investigated. All 4 were placed on administrative review. 2 state legislators, citing the Connolly case specifically, introduced House Bill 1847, which required school districts to maintain a formal, searchable record of any complaint made against a coaching staff member and to report any substantiated or credible complaint to both law enforcement and the State Athletic Association within 72 hours. The bill passed with bipartisan support. The governor signed it in a ceremony that Sandra Okafor attended. Daniel was invited. He declined, saying he didn't want the attention. He sent Cassie instead. She stood in the back of the room and watched the governor sign her name into the public record in a way, and said later that it was one of the strangest and most important moments of her life. The internal investigation of the 2021 complaint found that the athletic director had received a verbal concern from a parent whose daughter had abruptly left the program. He had met with the parent for 15 minutes, told her he would look into it, and then spoken informally with Connolly, who denied any inappropriate conduct and suggested the family had a personal grievance against him over playing time. The athletic director had accepted this explanation, never documented the conversation with the parent, never documented his conversation with Connolly, never involved human resources, and never contacted law enforcement. The parent who had raised the concern told investigators she had never received a follow-up call. 2 years later, Connolly had access to Cassie. The civil case settled before trial. Settlement terms were confidential, but 3 separate sources with knowledge of the negotiation described it as a 7-figure resolution across all 3 families combined. The settlement terms included, at Sandra Okafor's insistence and with all 3 families' approval, mandatory implementation of a new complaint documentation system at Lakewood and its affiliated school district, new mandatory annual training for all coaching staff on appropriate communication boundaries with student athletes, an anonymous digital reporting system accessible to students and parents, and an independent third-party review of all coaching staff personnel files going back 10 years. Sandra told reporters afterward that the money mattered less to her clients than the structural changes. The Hurst family didn't come forward for a check, she said. They came forward so the next girl doesn't go through what Cassie went through. What would you do if you were in Daniel's position? Comment below. Brett Connolly was convicted on all 4 counts following a 12-day trial. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. During closing arguments, the prosecution played the parking lot footage 3 times. The 3rd time, they paused on the moment Connolly said, "You're going to regret this," and left the image frozen on the screen for 15 seconds before continuing. They then read aloud the final message Connolly had sent Cassie, which had been introduced into evidence on the 3rd day of trial. Several jurors looked away from the screen while it was being read. None of them looked toward the defense table. Connolly was sentenced to 13 years in prison. He must serve at least 85% of his sentence before being eligible for parole under Arizona's Truth in Sentencing requirements. He will be required to register as a sex offender for the remainder of his life. The coaching career, the trophies, the magazine feature, the championship banners that still hung in the Lakewood gym until the school board voted to remove them, all of it is now a footnote to a criminal record and a prison sentence. His attorney said after sentencing that Connolly maintained his innocence. Connolly said nothing. Daniel Hurst never stopped being a calm man. That's what everyone who knows him says when they describe what happened over those 14 months. He never lost control in public. He never made it personal in a way that could be used against him. Even in that parking lot, standing 4 feet from the man who had spent months systematically dismantling his daughter's sense of what was normal, who had used her ambition and her trust as instruments of control, even then, Daniel stayed focused on what was documented, what was provable, and what needed to happen next. That composure, more than any single piece of evidence, is what made his case impossible to undermine. There was no footage of an irrational father. There was footage of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and had the patience to let it matter. Karen Hurst, in one of the few interviews she gave during the trial period, said something that got quoted widely. She said, "Daniel wasn't calm because he wasn't angry. He was furious. He was the most furious I have ever seen him. He was calm because he knew that was how you win." Cassie is now 19. She still plays volleyball. She is in her second year at a university 3 hours from Tucson on a partial athletic scholarship, playing for a program her parents and Sandra Okafor spent 6 weeks vetting before she committed. They reviewed the coaching staff's backgrounds. They interviewed other parents in the program. They spoke with former players. They asked questions that most families never think to ask, and they asked them without apology. The head coach of that program, a woman named Coach DiMartino, who had been coaching college volleyball for 16 years, later told a reporter that the Hurst family was the most thorough she had ever encountered in a recruiting process, and that she had found their thoroughness completely reasonable. Cassie has spoken publicly about her experience once, in a written statement released through Sandra's office the week after sentencing. The statement was 400 words long. She wrote that what happened to her was not her fault. She wrote that she had believed for a long time that she had done something to invite it, had been naive in a way that made her responsible. She wrote that the legal process had helped her understand that the responsibility had always belonged entirely to Brett Connolly and to the institution that had failed to protect her. She wrote that she hoped other young athletes who were in the middle of something that felt confusing and wrong would know that their confusion was not a character flaw. It was the intended result of a deliberate strategy by an adult who should have known better and did know better and chose not to care. She signed it with her full name. Do you think more parents and young athletes should know what grooming looks like before it happens? Let us know in the comments. This story matters for several reasons, and each of them is worth sitting with. First, it demonstrates that documentation is not optional, it is everything. Without the screenshots, without the timestamps, without the 3 months of careful, attorney-guided record building that Daniel undertook before saying a single word publicly, this would have been one father's word against a celebrated coach with 6 years of championship-level credibility behind him. The coach had trophies, the coach had administration loyalty, the coach had a lawsuit designed to make noise and create doubt. Daniel had a file. The file won. Second, it shows that the legal system can work when someone understands how to use it. Sandra Okafor didn't win this case in a courtroom. She won it before a single motion was filed, by building a record so comprehensive and so carefully constructed that the opposing strategy had no room to maneuver. Every time Connolly's team tried to apply pressure, they found that the pressure had already been anticipated and accounted for. That is not luck. That is preparation. And preparation requires finding the right representation the moment you realize what you're dealing with, not after you've already made moves that can be used against you. Third, it illustrates the specific and devastating cost of institutional silence. Connolly had a complaint filed against him 2 years before Cassie ever walked into his gym. One person who had the authority and the legal obligation to act decided it was easier to believe the coach than to follow procedure. He didn't document the complaint. He didn't escalate it. He took the coach's denial and filed it in the same place he filed every other inconvenient thing. Nowhere. That single act of avoidance gave Connolly 2 additional years of access to young athletes. Every victim who came forward after 2021 is, in some meaningful sense, a consequence of that decision. The civil lawsuit wasn't just about what Connolly did. It was about what the institution chose to enable. Fourth, it demonstrates that predators use the legal system as a weapon of silence, and that the only defense against that weapon is the willingness to be louder, more prepared, and more public than they expect you to be. The $1.9 million lawsuit was not a good faith legal action. It was a threat dressed in legal language. It was designed to cost Daniel money, time, and energy. It was designed to make other families think twice before coming forward. It was designed to make Cassie feel responsible for the disruption her truth had caused. Daniel and Sandra's response, a press conference, documented evidence, and a direct statement to cameras that they would fight every dollar remove the weapon from Connolly's hands. You cannot silence someone who is already speaking as loudly as possible. Fifth, it shows the specific power of what happens when families who have been harmed by the same person find each other. Cassie was not the first, she was not the second or the third. She was the one whose family built the case completely enough that it couldn't be managed or minimized. But the other families, the ones who had stayed quiet for years out of fear or uncertainty or the simple belief that no one would believe them, are part of this story too. Their courage in coming forward, in many cases years after the harm occurred, is what transformed a single complaint into a prosecution that couldn't be denied. If you are reading this and you have been through something similar with this person or any other, your experience is evidence. Your voice matters. You do not have to carry it alone. Finally, this story is about what an ordinary parent can do when they refuse to accept that ordinary parents are powerless. Daniel Hurst was not a lawyer. He was not a law enforcement officer. He was not an investigator. He was a project manager from Tucson who loved his daughter, recognized a pattern, and had the patience and discipline to document it before he acted. He followed his attorney's guidance. He controlled his reactions. He held his composure in a parking lot when composure was the most powerful thing he had. And because he did all of those things, his daughter's abuser is in prison, a state law has been changed, and the next girl who needs someone to believe her is a little more protected than she was before. Brett Connolly is serving 13 years. The school rewrote its policies. The state passed new legislation with Cassie's case cited in the floor debate. 3 families received civil settlements. An AIA audit found gaps in 23 districts and triggered 4 additional investigations. And Cassie Hurst is playing volleyball at a university she chose freely for a coach she trusts completely, living a life she built on the other side of something that tried to take it from her. It all started because one father refused to look away. If you found this story valuable, share it. Share it with every parent who has a child in youth sports. Share it with every teenager who is in the middle of something that feels confusing and wrong and has been told that their confusion is the problem. Share it with every adult who works with kids and needs to understand what grooming looks like from the inside before it becomes something worse. Share it with anyone who has ever been threatened into silence and believed the threat was real. This story needs to be told and retold because it happens every week in gyms and practice facilities and parking lots across this country. And most of the time, there is no championship record, no press conference, no Sandra Okafor, and no verdict. Most of the time, the institution wins, and the family is left holding the pieces. Cassie's family was different because of the choices they made, and those choices are learnable, they can be taught, they can be shared. They can become the reason the next family does it differently. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel because I cover more stories like this. Stories about ordinary people who refuse to be intimidated. Stories about what accountability actually looks like when someone is willing to demand it all the way to the end. Stories that need to be heard because the people who need to hear them are out there right now deciding whether to trust their gut or talk themselves out of it. Hit that subscribe button right now and leave a comment telling me what is the most important lesson you are taking from this story. Is it the power of documentation before you act? The importance of finding the right legal representation immediately? The way institutions will always protect themselves first unless someone forces them not to? The specific courage it takes to be calm when everything in you wants to do something else? The way silence is a strategy that only works if you agree to participate in it? Thank you for watching all the way through. Thank you for caring about children and about truth and about the uncomfortable, unglamorous, expensive, exhausting work of making things right in a system that is not always designed to do that on its own. Remember, predators depend on silence. They build their careers on it. They coach their victims into it. They file lawsuits designed to enforce it. Cassie Hurst's father walked across a parking lot and said, "Not in my family." And because he did, the silence broke and the light got in, and 13 other families found their way toward the truth. See you in the next story.